I'm R.A. Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. The Sun. Man, the Sun has been shining for a while now. Since 2019, the Sun have made to the semifinals or finals in every WNBA season. Excited to talk about this consistent contender with Blake Silverman. So let's dive right in. Welcome back to the show. Blake, I'm real hyped to have you on and talk Connecticut Sun with you. I'm sure we'll talk about the disrespect a few times. But I think kind of to lay the groundwork, to lay the land, it's the second year of a new coach, or we're coming into a second year of the new coach. Lots of movement during the offseason. Probably going to be one of the tougher training camps this season, just in the sense of like, you look at their roster and you're like, how do they even have that many people on roster right now? And it's just going to be a real, like a slugfest in training camp to see who gets those last few spots. Excited to have you. Like I said, I guess thoughts off the bat, like why don't we start with, give me the recap, the breakdown, the thoughts, where is the Connecticut Sun right now, or what happened up to this point?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. First of all, excited to talk some Connecticut Sun, the disrespect, capital CT, like you said. But last season, it was definitely a roller coaster ride for Connecticut. I mean, going back to last season, new season, or first year with a new coach, like you mentioned, new GM as well, and Darius Taylor after Kurt Miller went out to LA. Steph White comes in her first year. She ends up winning Coach of the Year, did a tremendous job. The team ended up 27-13, got the number 3 seed. And people thought that they had the New York Liberty on the ropes for a second in their semifinal series after Connecticut won game 1. Everyone was like, what is happening here? Are we going to see that Liberty Aces finals? And then the Liberty ended up taking care of business. But for the Sun, it was a rocky road at the start. Brianna Jones went down with a season-ending injury after only 13 games, and that was a huge blow. But throughout the rest of the year, they were still one of the best teams in the league. A lot of that due to Alyssa Thomas having an insane year where
some might say an MVP year.
Yes, that is exactly what I was going to say. I would maybe in any other season, she would be the runaway MVP. I think she was the MVP, but that's a conversation for another day. And yeah, they were just a deep squad. Like when Bree Jones went down, they had Beck Allen who filled in that starting spot that was vacated by Jones, not in the same role, of course, but they still had an Alyssa Thomas. They still had DeWanna Bonner. They had Natisha Heidemann in the guard spot. And then Steph White referred to Beck Allen as almost their 6th starter pretty much the whole year. So while the loss of Bree Jones, you certainly can't replace that, they had the depth to continue on as one of the best teams in the league, as they did. And they made a case. They had a good shot against the Liberty to get to the WNBA finals, came up short. But still a good season overall, and can't exclaim enough how good of a season it was for Alyssa Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, look, Alyssa, I still say, like, I don't care if you don't win the award. There has to be something given to you if you get the most first place MVP awards or votes. There's just something. Yeah, you broke it down perfectly. I feel like we didn't talk about Tiffany Hayes enough. Tiffany Hayes' aspect. I mean, granted, banged up throughout most of the season, and honestly, if Becca Allen doesn't get hurt in the playoffs, maybe we don't see the Liberty Aces finals that everyone kind of anticipated all season long. I know everyone's going to call me out. My hot take was we will not see Liberty Aces final. I was wrong. I'll be the first to admit it. I was wrong. We did see that final. It happened. Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of points. Let's real quickly, before we dive into this team a little bit more, lay more of the groundwork, give our listeners a little bit more of an understanding. In free agency so far this offseason, they lost Tiffany Hayes to WNBA retirement, still playing overseas. They lost Rebecca Allen, and they lost Natisha Heidemann. Now, obviously, Becca Allen was through a trade. Fine, cool. Who did they get? They got Tiffany Mitchell, Mariah Jefferson, Rachel Bannum, Shea Petty, Sydney Weiss, and Stu. Here's my thing when I look at this team, and if you haven't already, if you're a Patreon subscriber, everyone should subscribe. Obviously, there's reasons to and reasons not to. I get it. But if you haven't already subscribed to Winsidr Patreon, we recently this week just launched, in anticipation of the draft and the upcoming season, a Discord channel where you can, as a fan, as a WNBA intellect, discuss, debate, argue with the Winsidr staff about your takes. And a hot topic that was kind of up there that I brought up Connecticut with is like, look, this is going to be one of the most competitive WNBA seasons we have seen in a very long time. I'm not going to say ever because I hate when people do that. But this roster, I would not be shocked when I'm looking at this roster. Yes, it's very deep. Yes, it's going to be one of the toughest training camps in the league. They very easily could be a team that has a huge drop off. You just talked about it. They were the third. They were one of the top teams in the league for so long last season. At times looking like, oh my God, maybe they would be the team that upset Vegas or upset New York. I guess my first question for you is, do you think this roster is better? Assuming Bree Jones was healthy last year, right? Let's forget about the injury because obviously Bree Jones coming back is almost like a free agent addition. Do you personally think that this roster is better or worse than last year?
Oof, hard hitting question right out of the gate.
Ask you. That's all we ask.
Well, when I was going through their losses and their transactions, I was thinking they're still a deep team, and I like what they did. I don't know if I think the roster is necessarily as good as it was a season ago, just because of what I mentioned. Like Beck Allen was so big for this team. Natisha Heidemann was as well. Tip Hayes, like you mentioned. The big question for me is shooting wise. They lose. Yes, that was one of the reasons that Beck Allen was so big to influx her into the starting five, is because she was able to space the floor and make a lot of things happen. They still have Ty Harris, who shot the heck out of the ball last season. They have Dejanay Carrington. They brought in Bannum, who shot it well from three last year. But it's just more of a question mark for me, which is why I'm not ready to say that this season's iteration of the Suns roster is better on paper than it was last year. It could be. I'm not sure it is right now.
Yeah, I think you did a nicer way, and I'll be a little bit more rude in my description. No, I completely agree. First of all, the Rachel Bannum signing, whenever I talk about the Sun, I always am like, they lost shooting, and then they gained shooting by committee almost. Right. I look at Becca Allen, Tiff Mitchell, Mojef, Bannum, Shea Petty, Weiss, Stu. None of them are as good a 3-point shooter as Becca Allen.
Mm-hmm.
You could argue some of them are just as good a 3-point shooters as Natisha Heidemann. Fine, we can talk about that. But and Tiffany Hayes elements, for me, it's just the Connecticut Sun. We know that they're going to have a great defense. Look, let's be real. Bree Jones and Alyssa Thomas are, in my mind at least, the most dominant front court in the league right now. You can argue, this team or this team, fine, whatever. But right now, I don't think it's a crazy statement to say Bree Jones and Alyssa Thomas, most dominant front court in the league when healthy. So for me, it's okay, we know their defense is good. We know their paint protection. Their paint's going to be amazing. Can they shoot the freaking ball? Because that has been the question for so many years, I feel like, at some point. And to your point about Ty Harris, I'm a big Ty Harris fan. I just think she needs some more confidence. She needs more of a green light. I lost count how many times last season I saw her in position where she just hesitated. And if you have that hesitation, you're not comfortable. You're not fluidly shooting. You're not in the zone. And so many times. So for me, it's okay, Ty Harris could step up and be that growth, because I'm going to be blunt. Tiffany Mitchell, Mariah Jefferson, Shea Petty, Rachel Bannum, Sydney Weiss, they're not, in my mind at least, they are not closing the gap of where this team needs to be. And I don't even think they're closing the gap of where this team was last year, which I think wasn't even where, still last year wasn't good enough in my mind in terms of shooting. And yet still we didn't close the gap more. So for me, it's just like, okay, they really have not solved this shooting issue. And it seems like they kind of cast a wide web to get a lot of players who aren't elite shooters, but are, good to, better, and hoping that works. So I don't know. I'm just like, this is going to be a tough camp, but also like, how do you find somebody that's going to fill that need? There's a lack of shooting in this league. Are you concerned by that? Like when I say that maybe this team doesn't make the playoffs, that is a crazy hot take. I get it. Do you go, oh, I get it a little bit, or are you like, you're batshit crazy?
I think this team is gonna make the playoffs. I would be pretty surprised if they weren't. I'll go safe and say top 6 seed, but I was thinking top 5. But I mean, the concerns you bring up are valid. Like we talk about the shooting. Another thing is with the Beck Allen loss. Like you can't replicate the length that she has and what she does defensively. This is still going to be a very good defensive team, like you mentioned, with Alyssa Thomas, with Bree Jones. They were the best defensive team in the league last year in terms of the amount of points that they gave up per game. So yeah, it definitely is a bunch of trying to fill in those losses by committee. I'm interested to see what sticks and what this team looks like after, say, the 10 game mark, who is in the rotation, who is like contributing, and even in general, who makes the team. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of good players that were either retained from last year or brought in on training camp contracts. And they also do have the 10th pick in the draft. We're recording on the Friday before the draft. So we'll see what they're going to do there. I'm not sure that player might be a deferral pick, a stash pick, or they might decide to bring someone in who could shoot the crap out of the ball, whatever it might be, and have a say for making this roster.
Yeah, it'll be interesting what they do with this pick. I think the stash pick might be a smart move, only because it's going to be really hard for a draft pick to beat out. I know, like, people are like, oh, you're just crapping on all these players. I'm not crapping on. Like, first of all, I want to make this clear, because apparently this is an issue. Like, if you're making the W, you are one of the best basketball players in the world. That doesn't mean you're making a roster. Making the W is different than making a roster. And making a roster, so many other elements come in. You might be a better shooter, but they need you to do multiple things. Like, there's so many different facets and element that goes into it. It's hard to pick somebody who's just a shooter. So I didn't even thought about that before. I like the stash pick idea. I like the idea of them going strictly for a shooter, because you have so much depth. But also, look, Alyssa Thomas is not a spring chicken. Duana Bonner, Mariah Jefferson, they have a nice combo of older players and younger players, or medium players. But I feel like, knowing this roster, they can't put their chips in on the draft. They kind of need to say, hey, this is what we're about. We're trying to make a push. We're trying to make a run here. And we're trying to make a commitment to our superstars that we're going to make a push for the championship. I guess for you, of the offseason additions, who do you think is going to be the most impactful?
Oof. I think it's likely Mariah Jefferson, just because you trade away Natisha Heidemann, who was your lead guard last year. So I was trying to go through and I guess just put together the starting 5 in the second unit. And I do think that Mo Jeff is going to go into that role. I debated whether Ty Harris will be taking that step and maybe being this team's point guard of the future. But I think, at least for the interim, it's going to be Jefferson. And then we'll see how things shake out from there. But to me, that one's the immediate. And then, of course, like bringing in Tiffany Mitchell as well to play another guard spot. But if I had to choose one, it would be Mo Jeff.
Yeah, Mo Jeff is a player that I think a lot of people don't understand how good she is when healthy. And just her whole career, it just sucked. And not like her career, it sucks because she's a really good player, a proven winner who just hasn't been able to stay healthy in the W. And that just sucks. It just, like, there's no two ways about it. I agree. I think Tiffany Mitchell or Mojef. Shea Petty might be a big one too. And, Sydney Wee's still trying to prove it. It's like all of them, I could see them finding a way, kind of squeezing in and making some important moves. I'm going Tiffany Mitchell, I think, because of the health issues with Mojef. I'm concerned about that. And Tiffany Mitchell, while I think a lot of people hope, and by the way, I want to give myself credit, we have not tongue twisted up Tiffany Mitchell and Tiffany Hayes yet. So I want props to us. A lot of people I see making that comparison. And I think Tiffany Mitchell is going to provide more maybe defensively than Tiffany Hayes did, but not as much offensively. And for me, it's like, look, my two concerns on the defensive end is guard containment, right? Because look, if Connecticut can't score the three, you need to stop the other team from scoring the three. So that's kind of where my mind is of the pros and the cons, or like the good and the bads. And so I look at it, I'm like, okay, Tiffany Mitchell definitely helps them. They did not get anybody, in my mind, who fills that Becca Allen versatility, length, size, position, role type thing. And so I'm concerned about that. So I'm concerned about those two things. And I think defensively is going to be less of a concern because you have that protection. I don't know if anybody else listened to the Tarasi Bird stream of the Final Four or whatever, but they were talking about, at one point, Sue was asking DT just about, what's it like playing with BG? And like, it's hilarious because Diana Taurasi is a turnstile. Everyone knows it defensively. Side note, Diana Taurasi telling Caitlin Clark that she's going to have to work on her defense because she's a great scorer, but she's going to have to work on her defense in the W is like, who are you? What? Who? What? Do you know that like offenses just hope they're getting covered by you? But like, so for me, it's when I think of it, I think of kind of that element where defensively, Bree Jones and Liz Thomas have that backbone, that help, and you have Dwana Bonner, and they have depth of the big. I don't know. I guess I feel like I'm talking in circles. What's something that's like intriguing you about this team that you're like, I'm excited to see how this works out?
Yeah, honestly, I'm excited to see who makes this team. Like you bring up Shea Petty and Sydney Weiss. They also brought in Jocelyn Willoughby on a training camp contract. They have a couple other camp contracts, but obviously everyone knows it. This is the hardest league in the world for anyone to make unequivocally, factually. So this team specifically, I think they have maybe 9, if I want to be generous, maybe 10 spots that are spoken for. And I'm not including Shea Petty, Willoughby, Sydney Weiss, any of those players in those. So, and they also do have Leah Brown on a rookie contract. I know that her perimeter defense was something that Coach White talked about and really like valued a lot in the first year. So I'm interested to see what shakes out with her. But yeah, in general, and we're not even talking about the draft pick. That person may be competing at training camp. They may not be. But I do think that this roster, although it's clear who the main rotation will be, I think around the edges, and like you mentioned, some of the question marks that we have going into the season, they're not fully answered. And we'll see, I guess, what will be prioritized by what happens in training camp and what this final roster ends up looking like.
Yeah, I had not even, just as you were talking, I was like counting out the roster spots like, wow, yeah, like, because also they have like a billion players on protected contracts too. They got Carrington, Rachel Banham, which is like, what? Stu getting Bank on a protected, Tiffany Mitchell, Mariah Jefferson. Like the two players in my mind that are like guaranteed locks that are not on guaranteed contracts, protected contracts, are Dwana Bonner and Ty Harris. And I have to think you're not cutting either of those players unless it really hits the fan.
What about Olivia Nelson-Adota?
That's one that I didn't even count as like, but she's been balling overseas.
Right.
And so it's like
she's in my like she has a roster spot. Like I don't think there's a way that she's waived after training camp.
So she's number 10 for you.
I had her in a group of 9. Let me just list out who I had.
Run them down.
While I find it in my notes here. Okay, so the obvious ones: A.T., Bree Jones, Dewana Bonner, Mo Jeff, Tiffany Mitchell, Ty Harris, Dejanay, Rachel Banham, and Olivia Nelson-Adota.
Exactly. And so Stu is a protected contract, so I'm going to add her to that.
Yes, plus her.
So that's the 10. And then it's like, okay, Shay, Sydney, Jocelyn, a draft pick. Or
if they want to hold on to someone like Leah Brown, which
exactly. And also realistically, I mean, they have no cap room either.
Right.
So you're looking at it and you're like, do they even have the cap space to it? I mean, this is going to be, according to Her Hoop Stats, shout out to Her Hoop Stats, we're talking about 11 players on contract. So that's Alyssa Thomas, Bree Jones, Bonner, Mo Jeff, Tiffany Mitchell, Stu, Ty Harris, Rachel Banham, Dejanay Carrington, Olivia Nelson-Adona, and Leah Brown. All those players are on contract, and they don't have enough. They don't even have 20K. So they don't have enough for a 12th player. They have to drop Leah Brown, and then you can replace her with another player, and you up to what, 19 plus 66 is 90, 85. Cool. Thanks. I round up. That's why I got it wrong. I rounded.
Yes.
So they got 85. So you can toss 85 to a player if you wanted, someone outside of your roster or whatever. But yeah, it's like you don't even have enough cap space for Shea Petty and Sydney Weiss. You don't even have enough cap space for Jocelyn. So it's really going to be interesting. That's a great call, looking at Ono and Brown as kind of, because man, Bonner for 200K is. All right, we're just going in circles here. But yeah, no, you look at the numbers. We can talk about this for hours, because you look at the numbers and you go down it and you're like, this is going to be really tough. Not even just from a camp, like who's the best fit.
Right.
And that's another element a lot of people don't understand too, is like someone might be in camp and be made it clear that they're the better fit, and monetarily they just can't make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's just pretty wild. Is there, I know we kind of touched on a 10th pick in the draft. In my opinion, it's not going to be an impact player. Like the way we're talking about this, heck, even if they can keep them on roster. If you had choice, if you're GM, Darius Taylor, what are you picking? Now, you don't need to say a specific player. Talk in ideals.
Yeah, I think that you pointed it out earlier. Perimeter defense, and ideally someone that can shoot as well. I don't think there's the perfect player that fills both of those needs, but one player that I'll just throw out there that is getting some hype as of recently and after the NCAA tournament is Nika Mule from Connecticut. The ESPN folks and also some of the GMs addressed the media yesterday, and Rebecca Lobo said that she heard from a scout that not one player has improved their draft stock more after a singular loss than Nika Mule did after she guarded Caitlin Clark. So I just see that as a fit in Connecticut, throwing aside any like roster spot concerns and things like that. And also, obviously, it's in Connecticut. She played in Connecticut. That's cool. But I also think it would be super fun if like Angel Reese slid down to them. I don't think she will. I just think Angel Reese playing with Alyssa Thomas would be awesome. But there's also some intriguing international prospects, which I think make more sense just for where this team is. If they want to bring someone in that they think can make an impact and potentially like be on that rookie contract and take up a roster spot immediately, that's a way to go too. But I have to think that they might make a deferral pick with 10th overall if they stay there.
I keep looking and it's like, it's got to be a deferral. And the other problem is, if I'm them, I'm thinking I want to trade out of this draft and get into into 2025 or 2026. And I think it's really hard because everyone wants to do that.
Right.
So it's like, no, good luck. All right, let's talk about it this way. Hopes and dreams and expectations. So like going into the season, what are your hopes and dreams if you're on this team, if you're working for this team? And then on the flip side, what are your expectations? Imagining that we're done with the season, what do you think happened?
I think expectations is it's hard because I want to say try to be where you were last year, but that's not where the team is. The good news is you are getting Bree Jones back, and wishing for a fully healthy season for her. I mean, that was just super heartbreaking for the group. I think it's incredible what they did after that loss happened and like losing one of your star players, but they retained their core. They brought back Dewana Bonner. They still have Alyssa Thomas. They still have Bree Jones. They lost Rebecca Allen, who is a key rotational piece last season. But like you've been saying, they tried to address those needs by committee. So they're not as good as like the Aces or the Liberty. And then there's some other teams that are making their own improvements and might have a say for that third seed. But I think what they need to aim for is basically where they were last season. And when they get into the playoffs, because they're so good defensively, really anything can happen. That's what defense wins championships, as the old cliche goes. So you still have your defensive quarterbacks and cornerstones, and hopefully the defense is somehow even better with a full season of Bree Jones. But I do think if like your hot take comes true and they're fighting for a playoff spot or they don't make it, then you have to really reevaluate where this team is and address some of those key needs. Like we've been talking about, bringing in elite shooters and perimeter defenders to make the whole thing cohesive.
Yeah, and I want to remind everyone, make sure to check out our show notes for our sponsor and affiliate links. We just started working with some online sports books, so definitely check that out. They have some really cool promotions running now. It's in the show notes.
Alyssa Thomas for MVP, if you can bet.
There you go.
That.
Put the money down. Put the money down, and don't be mad if it doesn't happen. As I like to end every
financial
episode.
Advice.
Yeah, exactly. Not financial advice. And if you have a gambling problem, seek help. There's a hotline for that.
Yes.
I think we're actually supposed to say that. As I like to end every episode, Blake, who's your GOAT?
Deanna Nolan. Shout out Tweety Nolan.
Ooh.